My name's Karl Friston. I'm a theoretical neurobiologist. I'm a professor of neuroscience at University College London and an honorary consultant at Queen Square Institute of Neurology. I find myself slightly bemused to be talking to you today. I had assumed that all the problems with scheduling from the point of view of academics would have been resolved by now. I've been aware of the impediments to research into drugs that act upon this incredibly important receptor subtype 5-HT2 would have been resolved years ago. Indeed, I suspect that nearly all of my international colleagues in both psychopharmacology and clinical academia consider the withdrawal of the current impediments as inevitable as the decriminalization of homosexuality in the 1960s. So my work with 5-HT receptor subtypes and their functions started when I was a very young man. In fact, my very first paper was on a drug called ritanserin, which affects one of these receptors. Over the years, I have enjoyed collaborations with a stable of people who really invigorated neuroscience research in the 1980s and 1990s. Basically, psychopharmacologists, neuropharmacologists like David Nutt, Phil Cowan, and the like. Of that stable, the next generation were people like Robin, and I have worked with Robin and his team at Imperial, along with David Nutt. Using neuroimaging, using brain imaging of different types, including functional magnetic resonance imaging, which has the ability to pick up brain activity under different perceptual or intentional sets, the way that your brain is currently configured to do this task or to perceive these things, and also under different challenges of a pharmacological sort using drugs such as Psilocybin. We also have used magnetic encephalography. These are much faster ways of measuring brain functions to give you a lot more information about the way that the brain handles information, coordinates its distributed processing, basically the wetware and the physiology that makes us think and perceive and believe and act. The functional architectures, the functional anatomy that describes this wiring and this structure in the brain upon which the neuronal dynamics play depends very sensitively on the action of these drugs, and it tells you an enormous amount about where in the brain the messages are being handled, and the receptor specificity of the way in which those messages are gated and passed around and coordinated. So working with people like Robin and Dave and many others, people in Cardiff as well, there has been an enormous excitement in academia with a flurry of papers, very difficult to publish papers because these studies are, for obvious reasons, not easy to pursue. There has been a flurry of interest and activity in this area, with now an increasingly refined understanding of the importance of controlling the excitability of particular neural populations in certain parts of the brain, usually those parts of the brain that are deep in the brain, in the sense that they sit on top of those parts of the brain responsible for processing our sensations, or indeed driving our motor systems and autonomic systems. So that these are systems that are implicated in disorders of a sense of self, disorders of the ability to take perspectives, the ability to provide coherent explanations for the lived world based upon all these sensory messages coming from our eyes, our ears, and indeed our gut, literally gut feelings. They're all synthesized in certain parts of the brain, including regions like the parietal cortex, the prefrontal cortex. And this synthesis really, I repeat, sensitively depends on the relative excitability, or if you like, gain control afforded these high-level top-down processing relative to the gain afforded the sensory information. So there's an interesting balance between what I believe is going on and what my sensory organs tell me is going on. And either I can ignore my sensory organs and focus and commit to my prior beliefs and predictions about what is going on, or I can go the other way. I can de-emphasize, dilute, dissolve the confidence that I put in my high-level beliefs and attend much more to the sensory information. That access, that ability to move from a sort of top-down to a bottom-up driven kind of perceptual synthesis is exactly the axis or the lever that the 5-HT2A receptor seems to be in charge of. And it is exactly that receptor subtype that is acted upon by psilocybin. So you can see immediately that we have a really important lever in terms of addressing some of the most subtle yet most important aspect of the way that we operate as sentient creatures. There are lots of avenues, exciting avenues, that would be opened with a fuller understanding and quantitative understanding of the role of 5-HT receptor subtype functions and their implications for belief updating in the brain. I'll give you one example which I think has therapeutic potential in a wide scope of conditions and circumstances, and that's the ability to reduce the confidence or the precision that any given human being ascribes to the way that they think their world works. So this may sound a little bit abstract, but our understanding, certainly since the turn of the millennium, is that the brain is a processing machine. It's a predictive processing machine generating hypotheses, predictions, explanations for its sensations. And sometimes those hypotheses and explanations can be imbued with too much confidence. If you're a psychologist, you'd say that you've lost the ability to attend to the evidence in front of you. If you are a neurophysiologist or a neuropharmacologist, you'd say that you've lost the ability to adjust the postsynaptic gain of various populations responsible for passing messages around the brain that underwrite this belief updating. If you are a patient or indeed a therapist, you might look at this as stuck in a rut, that you have developed a set of prior beliefs due to the particular set of synaptic strengths, the connections between the different neurons at this high level, usually of what is thought of as a hierarchical arrangement of cortical areas deep in the brain. You become stuck and committed to certain ways of doing things. So if one had the ability, in conjunction with therapeutically monitored, organized and contained supervision, to pharmacologically and transiently just dissolve that aberrant overconfidence, overly precise beliefs, just to give the patient an opportunity to suspend for a moment her beliefs in what would happen if I did that, or why am I like this, or what is going to happen to me, or what does this particular set of sensations or information mean for me, just to suspend the ways that they've already been using to explain their lived world for a moment, allow them to explore other hypotheses. There's another way of doing this. Perhaps these assumptions are not the right way of explaining what's happened to me. Giving people the opportunity to explore other ways of behaving and thinking may have an enormous therapeutic potential in conditions such as, say, obsessional compulsive disorder, or ruminations in depression, or attitudes in terms of people who know that they're going to die. So lots of these behaviors and syndromes really rest upon particular beliefs about what is the kind of thing that I'm going to do or feel in this circumstance. But there are other ways of handling it. And you will only get to those other ways of handling it if you can, for a while, suspend the commitment to the ways that have been used in the past but are not currently working. So psychedelics are almost by definition, as it says on the tin, psychomimetic or drugs that act upon receptors in the brain that are extremely important for understanding message passing in the brain, neuronal message passing in the brain, that may underwrite most, if not all, neurological and psychiatric disorders. So you know that is true in virtue of the fact that every drug that works in both neurology and psychiatry is of a neuromodulatory kind. One of the most important neuromodulatory systems is the serotonergic system that operates on a particular set of receptors in the brain, the receptors that control or gate the communication and the message passing amongst the components of the brain. The drugs that we're talking about here are one of the most potent drugs in terms of operating on these receptors, and as such, they provide a vitally important tool for experimental manipulation to ask questions about the functional architectures that underlie both our perception and action, but also what can happen when the brain goes wrong, or when that message passing is perturbed or aberrant in conditions ranging from depression through to schizophrenia, from autism through to Parkinson's disease. So not having access, easy access, impediment-free access in the normal prosecution of our basic neuroscience research and translational neuroscience research. By translation, I mean being able to translate what we've learned in terms of basic science into a clinical forum in the service of improving either the diagnosis, the monitoring, and indeed the treatment of patients. Not being able to prosecute that translational neuroscience is a severe restriction. The particular importance of psilocybin-like drugs, or drugs of the psychedelic sort that act upon 5-HT2A, a particular receptor subtype of that, is further endorsed by the fact that it is exactly these receptors that have been heavily implicated in conditions like depression and other neurotic conditions, and indeed psychotic conditions. The very fact that they can produce abnormal perceptual synthesis speaks to their fundamental role, possibly in organic psychosyndromes and other psychiatric conditions that are associated with hallucinations, for example, schizophrenia. So to not look at this cornerstone of our ability to select and organize and synthesize and assimilate sensory data in the service of understanding, where we are in the world, and indeed our relationship to other people that constitute the world out there, is a remarkable impediment to research. A little bit, I would imagine, like being denied access to cardinal drugs in cardiology, such as digoxin, but in virtue of some medieval legislation invoked because witches used to use digitalis